We're back. We're in the middle of the process of change. Today, we're covering point C in the ACME process of change. Remember, if you're just joining us for the first time, go back and watch all the other videos. No, I'm just kidding. ACME stands for Accelerated Change Mechanisms of Excellence. We're in the game of getting from A to ACME faster and with less effort. And for those of you that are wondering, ACME, are we talking about the Roadrunner here? No, we're not, although that does probably make you smile, especially if you were raised in the 70s or 80s. But ACME is actually a Greek word. It means highest point, or the highest point you could possibly reach at that time. So ACME perfectly captures what we're trying to do here at greatnessu, in the sense that we're trying to get to whatever our highest point is, our peak potential at that time. Is it static? No. Will your peak potential be the same for your whole life? No, it'll always be something on the horizon. So we're in the business of getting from A to ACME faster and with less effort. And this process behind me is the baseline. It is absolutely the cornerstone of our business here. The process of change. I mean, my undergraduate degree was in engineering and my thesis was in process control, which was really about managing feedback and change in a system. And I'm fascinated. And then my master's work was in the philosophy of science and religion, which is, again, all about human beings' development and change. So I am basically just like a crazy person for change, a change nerd, if you will. And if you're a peak performer, or you're somebody out there that really loves being at their best, you're probably a change nerd too. If you're a coach, you're a super change nerd, because you're actually in the business of helping people change. So today we're talking about point C. Now, point C is where you actually verifiably produce the behavior. See, so the analogy in the baby learning to walk story is, this is where baby takes its first few steps without any help. Okay, so it's not, holding onto the wall or holding onto mommy's hands or whatever. It takes a few steps. Granted, it looks like Frankenstein. So let's talk a little bit about point C today. So point C is when you verifiably produce the behavior you're going for. Now, people say, but it must be cut and dried. Well, not necessarily. Think of this example. How many of you know someone, raise your hand or just chuckle to yourself, who has been driving a really long time, thinks they're a good driver, but you don't want to get in the car with them because they're really, really not. So what happened is they wanted to learn to drive. They learned to drive badly. They produced the behavior of bad driving, and then they mastered it. So whatever you accept at point C becomes the behavior, becomes the neurological pattern, becomes the habit, becomes the program. So point C is very important. Point C is important from both sides of this inflection. Coming into it, point C is not achieved until you produce the behavior. I don't care how many times you try and fall down, until you produce the behavior, you haven't produced the behavior. Sorry. So change actually happens in an instant, because 1 minute you're not, the next minute you are. Now, what happens is we have it in our mind, we're attached to a certain path. It's going to be this way. Our brains are looking for the straightest path, and our conscious mind will pick a straight path to where we want to go. But what happens is, along the way, we hit obstacles. And so obstacles are a whole conversation in and of themselves, which I'll probably do a video on. But when we hit an obstacle, what it means is that that's not the path. Now, your unconscious mind is, remember, we talked about conscious mind, unconscious mind a few weeks ago. Your unconscious mind is looking for the path of least resistance, which means, what's the fastest way without any resistance that I can get to my goal, my ACME, faster and with less effort? So that's what your unconscious mind is looking for. Now, what's happening is that can happen in an instant, because remember, at point B, you have all the components. As we talked about last week, you're ready to go. You've got everything you need, you've got desire, and you've got willingness. Now, the willingness comes into play here in this week, because you've got to be willing to get down every time you fall, or get up every time you fall, when you're trying to find the successful sequence or the successful behavior. And this is where most people quit. They say, oh, I tried it, it didn't work. Well, Churchill said, if you're going through hell, keep going. When do you stop? When you produce the behavior, when you verifiably produce the behavior. Now, just because you produce the behavior once, you are not done. Absolutely not. And next week, we're going to talk about, that's the biggest mistake people make, is they think they're done. And you're not, you're just starting. You finally externally produce the behavior. But think about it. If you took a baby that's just taken its first few steps and you took it down to the busiest corner in your town and let them go, you'd be crazy because they just learned to walk. They're no good on it. The neural network is extremely fragile. And so point C, but what's important about point C is the day before, the minute before, the millisecond before point C, there is no behavior. It happens in a millisecond. It happens in an instant. Change just happens. Now, at point C is when you produce the behavior and it's verifiable. But what happens is as we, trial and error, fall down, get discouraged, we try to go back to the way it was. We try to pretend like we don't want it, right? And that's not possible. Once you want something, you can never unwant it. But when you might get to a point, and I've heard people use this language before. They say, I hit rock bottom. I hit rock bottom and this is never going to happen for me. And they quit and they think they're in rock bottom. But I'd like you to ask yourself this question. How do you know if you're in rock bottom? Verifiably. Remember, I'm a scientist, so I really thrive in the scientific method, which is thesis, tested, experimented, observe what you actually see and draw conclusions from the actual data, not what you want it to say. Okay. So how do you know you're in rock bottom? Verifiably. How do you know you're in rock bottom? Now you're probably saying, oh, it feels the worst. It's terrible. It's dark. It's negative, whatever. But what if you wake up tomorrow and it's 10 times worse? Right? There's a funny clip from the sitcom Friends where Rachel says something like, I thought I hit rock bottom yesterday, but today there's rock bottom, 50 feet of crap, and then me. So how do you know you're at rock bottom if it could get worse tomorrow? And the secret is rock bottom can only be identified when you're on the other side. So see how right before the red dot here is rock bottom, but you can't identify that's actual rock bottom until you're on this side of the inflection point. So until you're on the other side, you keep going because you have to have willingness to give it what it takes. This becomes absolutely critical in getting through the obstacles that we talked about many, many weeks ago when I did that whole demonstration with the chair. Right. So if you forgot, go back and watch it, right? Because there are three sort of types of people when they're trying to achieve point C. One, they hit one obstacle and quit. And they say something like, it wasn't meant to be. The universe sent me a signal. That's insane. What happened was you hit an obstacle. Okay. Now, by definition, anybody who's moving is likely to hit an obstacle. And the ones who aren't moving are the only ones guaranteed not to hit anything. So think about that for a while. Or there's the second kind of person, which likes to blame everyone, put themselves at the effect of life instead of at cause, and say, oh, well, I couldn't reach my goal because of the chair, because of the obstacle, because of that, them, there, that situation. And they spend their lives battling the obstacle, which, by the way, takes you totally out of the game of getting results. And then there's the third kind of person that tries to muscle through. If I just work harder, try harder, do the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different outcome, which, by the way, is the definition of insanity. What I'd like to offer you here is the unconscious mind is always looking for the path of least resistance. So as long as you have a burning desire to get what you want and a willingness to give it what it takes, you will find a sequence. Now, there's a shortcut. If anybody's ever done it before, model them. Modeling is a fancy NLP word for copying, mimicking. Just replicate what someone else has already done. Now, you can't just replicate their actions, and this is where most people fall down. We'll talk about modeling in another video. You have to replicate everything, what they're thinking, what they believe, their physiology, all the things from the performance triad. You have to model the whole performance triad. You have to model their focus, their emotions, and their physiology, and their actions. Do those things, and you will find change happens in an instant. Now, at point C, remember, point A is you don't know what you don't know. Point B is, well, you know what you don't know. You don't know how to do it. Point C is you know consciously, you know how to do it, but it's conscious. So remember, the first time you learned to drive, you're like, 10-2, mirror, it was so overwhelming. And now, sometimes when I'm driving, I don't even remember how I got where I was going. Did I take the freeway? Did I take the back roads? So So point C is the first time you demonstrate it. Now, be very wary of point C, because whatever you accept as the result becomes the model for next week, becomes the model for mastery. So be very wary. Remember, that person learned to drive badly and then they mastered it. So do it the way you want it. Practice getting it the way you want it, and then lock it in. So point C is when you do the behavior verifiably and you know you've done it. So you're no longer talking about it. The rubbers hit the road. You've produced the behavior. Woohoo! This is not the end. It is not the end. And if you're a coach and you quit coaching here, you're doing your clients a huge disservice. This is the first most important part of change. And the second most important part of change takes place at point D, which we're going to cover next week. So if you got something out of this video, like, comment, share, pass it on, scream from the rooftops, send a carrier pigeon. We'd really appreciate it if you helped us pass this information on so that other people could have it. Next week, we'll be talking about mastery and point D. Stay tuned, because it's the secret hidden gem in peak performance. We'll see you next week.